Castlevania III Dracula's Curse is an amazing game that takes the formula from the first Castlevania and refines it. It adds multiple playable characters and branching paths, making multiple playthroughs worth the effort just to see what you missed. However, the North American version can be excessively difficult. In Japan, it's called Akumajō Densetsu, or Legend of the Demon Castle. It was released by Konami in 1989 in Japan, 1990 in North America, and 1992 in Europe. The prelude of the game sets up the story with a film reel, tying back to the cinematic influences present throughout the previous games. Castlevania III Dracula's Curse takes place in 1476, long before Christopher and Simon Belmont were born. The vampire, Count Dracula, sought to drive humanity into extinction. He released hordes of monsters into Wallachia, and soon he would take over Europe. The church sent out an army to stop Dracula and his monstrous forces, but their might wasn't enough. The Belmont clan was a family of powerful vampire hunters. Unfortunately, they were exiled from Wallachia due to the people fearing their power. The Belmont clan seemingly vanished. However, the church found one man from the powerful family, Trevor Belmont. With Trevor having the vampire killer whip in hand and determined to fulfill his destiny, he travels to Dracula's castle to end the vicious vampire's reign of terror. This prelude is great, but the English translation is a little rough. It definitely isn't written as fancily as it should be. Still, it's a fun way to begin the game. I love the art. After the prelude, you can input a name and it'll show up in the credits. I love this little cutscene before the actual gameplay begins. The first game did something similar with Simon walking to the gates of Dracula's castle. Unfortunately, Simon's quest didn't have a cutscene before the gameplay and just dropped Simon into a town. I'm glad they made one for Dracula's Curse. Like the first game, Dracula's Curse is split into stages, but stages are just smaller parts of what is called a block. Like the second game, you explore areas outside of Dracula's castle. With the player now having control over Trevor, the first block and stage begin with the iconic song, Beginning. It's an energetic song with some dark parts to it. It really sounds like you're embarking on an action-packed, but also perilous journey. The music is just fantastic all around. A lot of it is energetic, but some is pretty foreboding and creepy. It's that gothic but energetic sound that I think defines Castlevania and its music. Although, I think I prefer the boss music from the first game, Poison Mind. The boss music in Castlevania III, simply titled Boss Fight, is fast and intense. But the boss music from the first game is also intense while having the sound of darkness to it. It sounded refined and it really made me feel like I was fighting creatures of darkness. The game looks amazing, albeit some of the graphics look a bit messy. The first Castlevania, while still looking good, looks simpler compared to Castlevania III. As for Castlevania II, Simon's Quest, it also looked good, but that game had a problem with repeating aesthetics, just recolored. Castlevania III combines detail and variety to an extent that makes it the best looking game among the three of them. There are so many places outside the castle that give you a greater look at the world surrounding it and its scope. That doesn't mean the interior designs are lacking though. They still look visually impressive. The game looks beautifully dark and gothic. The game plays very similarly to the first Castlevania, and Trevor plays similarly to Simon. He can't change direction mid-jump. He can collect items that upgrade his whip from a leather whip to a chain whip, and finally an extended chain whip. Like in Simon's Quest, if he's on stairs, he can hold the attack button and attack continuously. He can also use all the sub-weapons that Simon can, such as the dagger, holy water, axe, stopwatch, and a cross. To use them, he needs to collect hearts, which act as ammunition. Something about Trevor that I wish was present in the actual gameplay is his cape. You can see it during the text crawl, the opening animation, and Trevor's ending. While Dracula's Curse is more like the first game, some enemies from Simon's Quest return like the spiders and slimes. The first boss is the Skull Knight. It's pretty easy to take down if you have the holy water and a triple shot. Like in the first game, it drops a crystal you have to grab to end the block. After the first block, a map showing the areas around Dracula's castle is shown, and Trevor gets a choice between an upper or lower path. Something cool about the map is that it has the word Castlevania on it, even in the Japanese version. This is one of multiple branching paths throughout the game. The upper path takes him to a clock tower that would seem to take him to Dracula's castle faster. The lower path seems to take him on a longer journey to it. The music for the clock tower is called Clockwork. It's a great song that's suitably gothic, dark, and heroic. It really fits climbing a tall clock tower. Trevor scaled the clock tower until he reached the top and found a monster. The malformed creature could crawl on the wall and ceiling. It was deceivingly agile for its size. It would throw daggers and axes at our hero, but Trevor persevered. He vanquished the overgrown acrobat. Once the monster was defeated, it transformed into a human. This monster was Grant the Nasty, an acrobatic noble thief who rebelled against Dracula and was turned into the hideous monstrosity Trevor saw. He was placed in a clock tower as a guard until Trevor fought the transformed Grant and won. It's possible the vampire killer purified Grant and burned away Dracula's dark magic. Trevor can choose to recruit him or not. I normally choose to recruit him. After Trevor meets with Grant, the bridge leading straight to the castle collapses, and he must go back down the clock tower. To switch characters, you press select. Swapping with your partner can be useful if you want to keep a sub-weapon and don't want to risk accidentally picking up another, replacing it. Grant the Nasty takes less hits than Trevor, but he's fast and he can climb on surfaces. He can jump high and even control his direction mid-jump. His attack is a short and weak stab with a dagger. He can also wield a throwing dagger, axe, and stopwatch sub-weapons. Platforming with Grant can be tricky because he can stick to walls and ceilings when I don't want him to. Crawling on surfaces is just pretty difficult. You stick to surfaces using the movement buttons. Maybe it would be better if Grant could stick to surfaces and you wouldn't need to keep holding a direction to make him stay. Grant's crouch is also lower than Trevor's, allowing him to dodge some projectiles that would normally hit Trevor. Grant is a companion who is completely optional. If you just take the lower path, you can miss him. His surname the Nasty could be a reference to the Nesti, a noble house from Wallachia. The House of the Nesti was the name of one of the two main branches of the Wallachian noble family house of Basarab. They were descended from Dan I of Wallachia. The other lineage of the Basarabs is the House of Draculesti, where Vlad the Impaler, the inspiration for Count Dracula, was from. The House of the Nesti also rebelled against Vlad. The most relevant member of the House of the Nesti to Castlevania is Basarab the Old. His brother, Vladislav II of Wallachia, was murdered by their cousin, Vlad the Impaler, in a duel in 1456. Basarab would lay claim to Wallachia, thus becoming the third pretender to the Wallachian throne. Vlad would invade Wallachia and make Basarab flee to the Ottoman Empire, but he would return with Ottoman support, and Vlad would supposedly die fighting against him in 1476, the same year as the game. At some point, Trevor and Grant find a branching path. Both paths lead to a new partner and you can't miss them. The upper path is easier. After taking the upper path, Trevor and Grant find a Cyclops surrounded by statues. After Trevor and Grant slew the powerful Cyclops, lightning struck one of the statues, and it's revealed to be a person who was turned to stone. This is Saifa Belnades, a vampire hunter. She was a witch who disguised herself as a man so she wouldn't be executed through the witch trials. She was eventually captured by a Cyclops and turned into a statue. Her basic attack is hitting with her staff. It's quick but doesn't have good range or damage. Her movement is similar to Trevor's, but she takes more damage. She can't use the sub-weapons Trevor and Grant use, except for the stopwatch. Instead, she uses spells which act as the rest of her sub-weapons. The fire spell is a powerful horizontal attack with good range. The ice spell lets her shoot out ice projectiles around her, which can freeze enemies and projectiles, letting her break them with her staff in one hit. The spell can even let her freeze and kill enemies that normally can't be killed, like fuzzbusters and red skeletons. Finally, she has a lightning spell that lets her fire 3 electrified spheres that deal a lot of damage. However, they have to find their targets, and you can't summon more until all of the spheres are gone. Her spells are powerful, and one of the best things about them is that they only cost 1 heart per use. Even the ice and lightning spells would shoot out multiple projectiles. Her name could be a mistranslation of Cipher, which means a secret or disguised way of writing. It fits with her disguising herself as a man. Trevor can only have one partner accompanying him, so if he decides to bring Cipher along, Grant has to leave. Every character has their strengths and weaknesses, and it's worth playing the game more than once to check them all out. If Trevor and Grant take the lower path, they would find a tomb with a coffin and a large cross. When they first enter, bats fly out of the coffin and form into a caped adversary. I love the fight because it's so similar to the Dracula fight in the first Castlevania, but it's more graphically impressive. There's more detail in the background. He relocates around the arena and he opens his cape to shoot out fireballs. Instead of simply disappearing and reappearing, he transforms into a swarm of bats and flies around the arena, letting you know where he's going. There's even a cool mist effect when he transforms. His fireballs are also bigger and more detailed. Like with the Dracula fight in the first Castlevania, sticking to the middle of the arena can make the fight easier. Once he's defeated, he vanishes with only his cape remaining, and then he reappears with a smaller form. Afterward, Trevor can recruit him. This is Adrian Fahrenheit Tepes, also known as Alucard, the son of Dracula. He opposed his father's wicked ways and decided to use the name Alucard, which is Dracula in reverse, to sow it. He is a Dhampir, the hybrid offspring of a human and a vampire. His mother was a human named Lisa. She was creating medicines, but was executed in the witch trials which made Sypha hide her identity. Alucard was there during her execution, where she told him not to hate humans, and that she would love her husband for all eternity. Alucard would honor her last words. When Dracula found out about his wife's death, he declared war on humanity, an act which made his son rebel. Alucard waited underground for a powerful warrior to accompany him to kill Dracula, and he finally found one in Trevor Belmont, a member of the fearsome and powerful Belmont clan. Alucard is probably the most difficult character to play as. His basic attack lets him shoot a fireball. He's the only other character whose basic attack can be upgraded. He can shoot up to 3 when fully upgraded. While the wide arc and range of his attack are impressive, it does very little damage. There are parts of the game where you won't be able to hit an enemy with all of your fireballs, making the lack of damage very apparent. A very detrimental flaw of his attack is that he can't attack on stairs. He seems very similar to Trevor when it comes to health and movement, but Alucard has one advantage concerning movement. He can transform into a bat by pressing down and jump. He can also boost himself in this form with jump. This form continuously drains hearts, but it can be very useful for navigation. It can even save you from risky jumps and getting knocked back. It's useful for this part at the last block. The name Alucard came from the 1943 film Son of Dracula. That Alucard is also the son of Dracula. However, in the film, Alucard is a vampire and he dies when the sun rises. I think what happens canonically is that Trevor recruits every ally and they all fight together. I wish I could recruit every ally in the game in one playthrough. I think it would reinforce the feeling of having a group of warriors going on a journey, and I think the ability to switch between all of the characters would have been fun and interesting. Because of Trevor's strength, health, and range, the various types of sub-weapons he can use, and because you always have him, I think he's the most reliable character. The game expects you to always have Trevor, so if you're struggling on a stage with a character other than Trevor, try swapping to him. It's possible to play through most of the game with just one character, but it's better to mainly use Trevor and swap occasionally. When I play Dracula's Curse, I normally recruit Grant and then Sypha. Alucard is just sleeping in his coffin. Grant and Sypha are either trapped as a monster or a statue. I feel bad if I don't free them. After enough stages on either path, you'll eventually enter Dracula's castle, and there's even a new map for it between blocks. The map is styled similarly to the one from the first Castlevania. While it looks nice and I appreciate that it's like the map from the first game, I really enjoyed the detailed map of the areas around the castle, without big blocky pathways. and I wish they continued it with the castle map. I love the little animations on the map screen, like the bridge connecting the clock tower to the castle crumbling, the ship sailing to a tower near the castle, and the sunken city collapsing. Maybe it would have been difficult to continue this style of map with the indoor areas. One of my favorite songs from the game is Aquarius. It plays on blocks close to the castle. It's a very energetic and catchy song that makes it feel like things are going to ramp up. The rest of the journey will be difficult. That song gives me the motivation to push forward. The upper path with Sypha can have some challenging parts, but the lower path with Alucard has what I think is the hardest block in the game. What's worse is that you can't ignore it. It's mandatory. If you choose to go through Alucard's path, you will eventually have to play it. It's block 7 in his path. It's absurdly long and difficult. One of the worst parts is this one where blocks fall from the sky, and you have to dodge and climb them. This is where Alucard's bat form comes in handy. Just fly up. However, if you don't have Alucard, it is a difficult test of patience and agility. There's also a vertical scrolling section where multiple enemies pester you. To top it off, you have to fight multiple bosses. It's one of the most difficult blocks in the game, and I would completely understand if people don't choose Alucard's path, or if they save during the block. Block 8 of the game is the main hall. This is where the upper and lower paths converge. Some enemies also do more damage for the rest of the game. The entrance is similar to Block 1 from the first game, and a version of Vampire Killer is playing called Deja Vu. It's a fun title that references the first Castlevania. Block 8 isn't just a recreation of Block 1 from the first game, however. There are also parts similar to Block 5 which are noticeable with the axe armors, and especially the boss, Death. Similar to the first game, there's a hallway leading to him, but instead of fighting axe armors and Medusa heads, the floor collapses and there are a bunch of candles to break. There's also a poor knight here whom you can just jump over as he falls to his doom. Be careful of the candles at the end because one contains a stopwatch and the other contains a dagger. Neither are effective against the boss. Death, like in the first game, flies around while summoning sickles. I found Grant useful against Death because of his movement. It's easy to dodge the sickles with him. It's really cool to see how much Death has evolved compared to the previous games. I love how his cloak flows during the fight, and I love his animation when he transforms. Something I think would have been great was if he swung his scythe to throw sickles like he did in Simon's Quest. However, he only threw one sickle per swing, so maybe it wouldn't have worked when his fight with Dracula's curse had him summon multiple sickles at once. Death is more difficult than he was in Castlevania and Simon's Quest, but Holy Water can make the fight easier like in the first game. Block 9 is really difficult. There are spike traps and the slightest touch will kill you instantly. There's a painfully intense climb up some stairs where flying skeletons and bone pillars pester you. There's also this hard part with water, mermen, and crows. The boss is a doppelganger that takes the form of the current character you're using. Something cool about the doppelganger is that after you kill it, you can see it rapidly switching forms. The heroes would eventually reach Dracula's throne, and thus, the final battle begins. Dracula's fight is not as simple as the one in the first Castlevania, or as easy as the one in Simon's Quest. It's a 3-phase boss fight. The first phase has Dracula summoning fiery pillars from the ground. You have to hit his head while dodging the flames. The second phase has multiple of his heads gathering and transforming into a hideous, floating amalgamation of heads spitting blood. You have to skin each of the heads until the form breaks apart. Finally, the third phase has Dracula turn into a massive humanoid creature with claws, a bird head, and wings. Platforms formed from the floor float around, allowing you to ride on them. Dracula shoots out lasers from his hands and head. It's a challenge to hit his head while dodging lasers in the pits on the floor, but our heroes succeed. They vanquish Dracula. With Dracula's death, the evil cult of the land vanished, and Europe was saved. Depending on who Trevor brought with him or if he went alone, you get different endings. Every ending has Trevor watching the castle crumble while standing on a cliff. If he recruited an ally, that ally would be alongside him. With Grant's ending, Grant lifts his arms victoriously, and we learn he would help rebuild Wallachia. Sypha's ending has her hood removed, revealing her long flowing blonde hair, and Trevor puts his arm around her. Sypha felt peace, and she and Trevor had fallen in love. Alucard's ending has his cape flow in the wind, and while he is victorious, he could not escape the shock and guilt of having killed his father. Trevor's ending has his hair and cape flowing in the wind. He has no one to share the victory with, but in the shadows, someone watches the castle fall. Whichever ending happens, one thing is certain: the Belmont name would be respected and become legend. The credits show off the characters and the levels. It also shows the name you inputted as Trevor's. After the credits is the hard mode, or New Game Plus. You can play through the game again, but you take more damage, there are more enemies, and some enemies have been swapped with more powerful ones. While I'm happy that Dracula's Curse is more like the first Castlevania, I think adding some RPG elements from Simon's Quest could have been cool. Imagine if you could upgrade your character so they would do more damage, or if you could upgrade their health. It would be cool if Trevor started out with a leather whip, but it gets permanently upgraded the more points he acquires. Grant's dagger could turn into a sword, giving him more range, or he could upgrade his movement speed. Sypha's staff could give her health whenever she hits an enemy, like her descendant Yoko Belnades. Alucard could start off with one fireball, but he could upgrade to permanently having 3. If you thought the first Castlevania was difficult, Dracula's Curse will seem impossible. It doesn't help that you get 2 lives for each continue rather than 3 like in the first game. You can input special names in the naming screen and they can affect the game, but they only work on the North American and European versions. Some of the names are also names of the developers. Input "Help Me" it will start with 10 lives. Very useful if you want to make the game easier but don't want to use saves. One of the other names is Akama, referencing Hitoshi Akamatsu, the director of the first Castlevania, Simon's Quest, and Dracula's Curse. This code lets you start New Game Plus. A neat little thing is the sound test, which you can access by holding jump or attack, or both, then press start. Here you can listen to the songs from the game. The story of the game had some conflict with the story of Castlevania The Adventure, the first Castlevania game on the Game Boy. Both games take place 100 years before the first Castlevania. Their stories were both considered the first fight against Dracula. Koji Igarashi, a producer for many Castlevania games, would later correct this by placing Dracula's Curse before the adventure. The Japanese version is very interesting. Akumajō Densetsu, or Legend of the Demon Castle, is arguably the best version of the game. When I feel like experiencing the first battle against Dracula, I usually play the Japanese version. They made many changes for the US version and I wish they didn't. One of the most notable things about the Japanese version is the music. Akumajō Densetsu contained a specialized sound chip VRC6. It was removed for the US version because the NES didn't have external audio support, while the Famicom did. A minor but cool addition in the US version is that the blood that Dracula's second form spews out makes a sound when it hits the floor. The part in Trevor's ending where a person in the shadows watches the castle fall is something not from the original Japanese version. I don't think the person watching is meant to be anyone significant. I think it was just someone who saw what happened and would spread the word, making the Belmont name legendary. The names in the credits are different between the Japanese and US versions. The vampire hunter is called Sypha Belnumdes in Japan. Sypha is spelled differently in the US. The P and H in her first name are replaced with an F. Sypha's surname in both versions of the credits is Belnumdes. Interestingly, her name in the US manual uses Sypha with a P and H, but her surname is Belnades. In media they include Sypha after Castlevania III. Sypha with the P and H are used, and her surname is Belnades. The acrobat is called Grant Dynasty in both versions of the credits. As for evidence for the Dynasty name, you can find it in the US manual. When his surname is brought up in media after Castlevania III, Dynasty is what's used. Another difference between the Japanese and US versions is that the US manual refers to him as a pirate captain. There's nothing in the Japanese version that supports this. Alucard's name is Adrian F. Tepes in both versions of the credits. His real name isn't revealed in the US manual. The middle initial stands for Fahrenheit. The main protagonist is called Ralph Belmont in Japan, and Trevor C. Belmont in the US. Ralph still has the same middle initial, but it's not in the Japanese credits. As for what the middle initial stands for, it's possible it stands for Christopher. Someone who was possibly the original scriptwriter for Akumajō Densetsu mentioned that the C in Trevor's name stood for Christopher. The team behind Castlevania the Adventure also used the name Christopher for a Belmont who came before Simon. Christopher and Trevor were meant to be the same person. To differentiate the two, he decided to give him the first name Ralph, and Christopher was turned into a middle name. There are some notable visual changes compared to the Japanese version. The prelude used to have an animation of sweeping clouds above Dracula's castle. The opening where Trevor is kneeling at the cross had the cross glowing in the Japanese version. The font is fancier than in the Japanese version. Some nude statues were covered up, and Medusa's sprite was edited to reduce the size of her dress. The censorship that happened internationally is unfortunate, but at least they don't affect the actual gameplay. Some enemy designs were also changed, such as the gremlins from Akumajō Densetsu turning into hunchbacks from the first game. Spikes were added to frogs. The mummies were redesigned to look more intimidating. A visual change that also extends to gameplay is the fire and the water dragon bosses. The less complex animations might have made the fight run smoother. Internationally, New Game Plus actually replaces some enemies with more powerful variants. For example, the Medusa heads are replaced with erratic flying skulls. A change I found appealing were the handshakes when Trevor recruits a new ally. They were revised internationally to make them less awkward. The game became more difficult internationally, notoriously so. In the Japanese version, the damage is specific to each enemy. For example, the axe armor specifically deals 3 damage on contact and 2 damage with the axe. However, some enemies become stronger once you reach block 8, which is the castle entrance. Then the axe armor does 4 damage on contact and 3 damage with the axe, and this carries forward to New Game Plus. In the US version, the damage you take depends on the stage. Outside of a few exceptions, every enemy does the same damage depending on the block they're on. This happened in the first game too. This makes the early blocks really easy, but the late blocks are a real nightmare. The US version also made some other changes to the enemies that contributed to making the game harder. Some enemies like the axe armors and bone pillars take more hits. The bone pillars also fire with less delay, and the fireballs themselves travel faster. Bone dragons can only be damaged at the head. The Cyclops boss can now go 2 blocks, Dracula's third form can shoot lasers anywhere other than just downward, and more. The stages also went through some changes. I could understand some. The pendulum room in the final block had some bats added. This makes sense because it's like an evolution to your possible first encounter with the swinging pendulums at the clock tower. However, that's only a possible first encounter. Because the clock tower is optional, a player could completely miss it. One change in the final block that really irritates me is where you respawn after you die to Dracula. Back in the first game, if you die to Dracula, you respawn at the bottom of the stairs right before his throne room. Even if you lose all your lives. In Akumajō Densetsu, you respawn at the bottom of the stairs when you lose a life, but you respawn at the start of the block if you lose all of your lives. I'm already not a fan of this, but because of the weaker bone pillars and the lack of bats in the pendulum room, it's not that bad. In Dracula's Curse, you respawn at the room before the pendulum room if you lose a life. I really hate this. First, the bottom of the stairs count as a separate stage in the block, meaning it should act as a checkpoint like it does back in Akumajō Densetsu, but it doesn't. Second, Dracula is already a long and difficult fight with 3 phases. I think it would be best to retry as soon as possible. A benefit I can see from respawning here is that you can get an axe for Trevor, which can be really useful against Dracula. However, this axe is only available in the US version. In Japan, it just drops a heart. Some drops from candles have changed from Japan to the US, but the US version actually added some new candles. Right before the throne room, there are some candles that mainly drop hearts, but one drops a sub-weapon in both versions. Akumajō Densetsu has a cross while Dracula's Curse has a dagger. I think that's a good encapsulation of the differences between the two games. Akumajō Densetsu is balanced. Of course you'd get a cross before Dracula, it's the final fight after all. However, Dracula's curse likes to mess with you more. You get a nearly useless dagger against the final boss. Although, it's not completely unforgiving. You can get an axe that's not present in Japan, and it's a fantastic weapon against Dracula. In terms of gameplay changes with the playable characters, Trevor, Cypher, and Alucard are practically untouched. Grant's basic attack was changed. In the Japanese version, his basic attack lets him throw daggers without consuming hearts, and without needing to collect the dagger's sub-weapon. This lets him throw daggers while crouching because otherwise you'd need to press up and attack to use a sub-weapon. However, you can't upgrade a dagger with a double or triple shot like you could with the dagger's sub-weapon, meaning there can only be one dagger on screen at a time. However, the range and versatility of his basic attack is so great that it's hardly an issue. His daggers are amazing and can make some boss fights too easy. In the US, his basic attack was turned into a sword stab with a dagger. Although, if he gets the dagger sub-weapon, at least he can upgrade it with a shot multiplier. The reason for such a drastic increase in difficulty could be because of the rental market in the US. Renting games was effectively illegal in Japan, so there was no reason to make the game absurdly difficult. However, someone could rent the game in the US, beat it quickly, and return it. While the game isn't as short as the first, people could feel satisfied with beating it once, discouraging a purchase. If the game was harder, they could feel more encouraged to purchase it so they can beat it. The European version keeps most of the changes from the US version, but it's slightly easier by making you take one less bar of damage in all stages and giving some enemies less health. There are elements in the plot that seem to have been changed or at least given less attention in succeeding games. Dracula's reason for terrorizing Wallachia and taking over Europe seems to come from the desire to destroy and greed. Later lore would have him lose his wife prior to the events of the game, driving him to seek revenge against humanity. A translation of the prelude states that he revived dark gods and used their power. A translation of the story in the manual states he only revived one evil deity. Dracula's final form could be the specific evil god himself, or Dracula using his form, although it could just be Dracula's true form. The evil god is meant to be a representation of all evil, similar to how Dracula's second form in the first Castlevania was actually an incarnation of the curse of man. It's possible that the evil god is the devil himself. In current Castlevania lore, I'm not sure if the evil god has been wiped away from canon. The evil god is referenced in Harmony of Dissonance and Curse of Darkness. Once you deal the final hit to Dracula's first phase, his body falls apart and only his head is left. Multiple Dracula heads then appear and combine to become the second phase, seemingly connected by a brain at the top. Notice how there was a transition. You see how the first phase led to the second. After you kill him in his second phase, he falls apart and burns away. The third phase disappears out of the shadows, almost as if it's a different entity. Outside of Dracula's curse, notice how in the first Castlevania, the curse of man burst out of Dracula's body. Even back in the first Castlevania, they were showing how one phase led to the next. Simon's Quest is pretty irrelevant because Dracula only has one phase. As for the adventure, Dracula explodes and a giant bat appears. The lack of a transition could be because of hardware limitations, but I'm also unsure about involving the adventure because Hitoshi Akamatsu seemingly didn't work on it. As far as I'm concerned, that giant bat is just another form of Dracula. When it comes to the three Castlevania games with Hitoshi Akamatsu, the intention was probably that Dracula's second form in Castlevania was actually the Curse of Man, and Dracula's third form in Dracula's Curse was actually the evil god. Dracula's third form also resembles statues of Pazuzu, a demon from ancient Mesopotamian religion. This could actually be another cinematic inspiration considering Pazuzu is a demon in the Exorcist movies. I'm unsure if this means this third form and to that extent the evil god is supposed to be Pazuzu. However, Pazuzu is known as a benevolent domestic spirit and the wandering wind demon. Judging by the fight, he's not exactly benevolent. Although, perhaps he is the Dracula because this is his castle. He also doesn't have any wind attacks, just lasers. Although maybe the platforms are floating because of his wind powers. The monster you fight in Dracula's third phase is really interesting. It could be Pazuzu, the devil, its own unique entity, or just Dracula's third form. The Japanese instruction booklet revealed that Alucard was actually born with a human heart, but Dracula sold his own soul and Alucard's soul to the devil for more power, turning Alucard into a vampire. This element of his backstory may have been retconned for later entries, where Alucard was born a Dhampir. After the final boss, the sun rises and Alucard doesn't seem affected, possibly signaling that the contract with the devil has been broken and he's human again. Perhaps defeating his father and the evil god turned him into a Dhampir, rather than just reverting him back into a human. In the original Dracula novel by Bram Stoker, Dracula doesn't actually get burned by sunlight, but it instead weakens him. In all three Castlevania games by Hitoshi Akamatsu, we never see Dracula in the sunlight, so we don't know if he would actually be burned by sunlight. With that in mind, maybe having Alucard exposed to the sun doesn't mean much. Because of how relevant the devil is to Dracula and Alucard, it's possible he's actually the evil god. It would be fitting to have the devil as the final boss rather than Pazuzu or a vague evil god. It just fits. Although this could still just be Dracula's third form. The concept of Dracula gaining powers from the source of evil, whether that be the evil god or the curse of man, seems to carry on in later installments with the introduction of the entity Chaos. The design archives for Dracula's curse are pretty interesting. Grant seemed to have the same damage resistance as Trevor. It seems he initially didn't have a basic attack. Maybe it's just referencing that Grant's basic attack is just a dagger subweapon, but it's still pretty interesting. In the section which talks about his subweapons, apparently Grant could have thrown his dagger in 4 directions. He could also ride on top of some enemies. Alucard's projectiles seem to have been called bat rounds, which makes me think he initially saw 3 bats rather than 3 fireballs, similar to Jibo from the Bloodstained games. Something interesting about his basic attack section is that it says he wouldn't have power-ups, having him start with the 3-shot attack. I think I would have preferred this over needing to upgrade his attack. Some of the bosses have interesting notes on them. The Cyclops seemed to have the ability to jump and you could have stood on his hammer. The twin-head dragon has a note saying that the timing should be adjusted so the 2 heads don't appear at the same time. I assume that made the fight too easy because they appear at the same time in all released versions. Grant also could have rode on top of their heads. Alucard's boss fights seem to have him walk and jump around. That would have been interesting to see. Maybe you could have fought him in his playable form as a second phase. A visual of the screen layout reveals some interesting things. The layout is similar to the first Castlevania and the released game, but what caught my attention were the protagonist grabbing onto a curtain and attacking with his whip, a creature that looked like a harpy, and what seems to be a werewolf breathing fire. Because there's another curtain close to the one the protagonist is grabbing onto, he might have been able to grab onto it and keep swinging, reminding me of the whip swinging in Super Castlevania IV. Neither the harpy nor the werewolf appear in the game. From the visual here, it seemed Dracula's curse could have been even more advanced than it already was. Some game ideas from the design archives were really interesting. Weather effects such as rain, lightning, and wind would have affected gameplay. This reminds me of the design archives for Simon's Quest, where there were ideas to have gusts of wind and tornadoes during gameplay. A tornado did make an appearance in that game, but you had to activate it. Lightning effects made it into Dracula's curse, and you could actually start the Cyclops in Block 3 with lightning by throwing a dagger when the clouds flash. Correctly timing your jumps and spinning cogwheels made it into Dracula's curse. Attacking by making objects from background graphic elements fall didn't make it. Falling blocks still exist in the game and hurt the player, although they don't seem to affect enemies. I think they could have been interesting. Walking along a collapsing bridge and having the blocks hurt enemies below would have been cool visually and in gameplay. Castlevania III Dracula's Curse is an amazing game. It shows the player interesting areas outside of Dracula's castle with more linearity and focus. It introduces characters who would later become important in the lore of the game series. Each character has gameplay quirks that shake up how Castlevania is usually played. It takes the focus and intense gameplay of the first game with choices of where to go from the second game. With multiple characters and branching paths, replaying it gives the player an opportunity to see areas and characters they might have missed. It's a wonderful combination of the previous games, and it is one of the most important games in the series. Even if I think the US version can be crushingly difficult at points, playing the game in the Castlevania Anniversary Collection will let you save, making the game easier. If that's not enough, you can play the Japanese version, which I think is better balanced. Castlevania III Dracula's Curse is a legendary game and I highly recommend it. Thanks for watching.